My name is Rosemary Hagiwara. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the Chief Election Officer for the City of Vancouver. Welcome and thank you for joining us tonight. Before we get started, I want to acknowledge that the 2022 Vancouver election is taking place on the traditional, unceded, ancestral, and shared territories of the Hunkaminam and Squamish-speaking peoples, including the Musqueam Indian Band, Squamish Nation, and the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. These nations have stewarded the lands since time immemorial. Before we begin, a few housekeeping items to review. This session is being recorded and will be available at vancouver.ca/vote after this event. We intend to keep our attendees anonymous. We will not mention your name if you ask a question. Only the organizers of this event will see the names. You may view more accurate transcription through the stream text link, which is now in the chat, or you can also find it from the email we sent out today. We also have registered American Sign Language interpreters with us tonight. There's no need to worry about being on mute as we have deactivated this function. If you have a question for the panelists or guest speakers tonight, we will address them at the end of the presentation. Please click on the icon with Q&A on your screen to leave your question. If you have technical questions or questions for our organizers, please use the chat button. The chat button will otherwise be deactivated for communicating with others to minimize disruptions during the presentation. You may also use the closed captioning feature available on your screen. This is our plan today. This is the first of 4 sessions, and we will cover other topics about becoming a candidate in other sessions. My colleagues Cheryl Chan from the Vancouver Park Board, as well as David Green from the Vancouver School Board, will be presenting with me tonight. Dr. Joy Masuhara and Trudy Goals of Women Transforming Cities and Professor Gerald Beyer of UBC Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions will be joining us later as our special guests. Let us get started with an overview of the role of an elected official. What are your duties as an elected official? Some examples of what you would do if elected are spending a considerable amount of time connecting with citizens, listening to their comments and concerns. You'll need to commit to understand existing policies and programs or potential impacts of draft policies and programs before making decisions. You need to be proactive in working and finding collective solutions with other elected officials and partners in other government agencies. You'll be expected to make difficult decisions around budget and development to create more housing in the city. And while you're doing the job, you are bound by the rules and policies in how you exercise your authority as an elected official. We will discuss this in greater detail in a future session. I will spend a few minutes now focusing on what the city is responsible for before I turn it over to the other panelists. The City of Vancouver is responsible for providing access to local roads, maintaining sidewalks, streetlights, cemeteries, collecting garbage, providing residents access to water, approving changes to zonings and developments, approving building permits, regulating businesses, providing funding to the police department and libraries. As an elected official, you'll be expected to make decisions on behalf of the community and address issues in all areas in the city. Different elected official positions support in different ways. So let's explore. Council is made up of 1 mayor and 10 councillors. The role of council is, but not limited to, setting strategic direction such as the Vancouver Plan, Future of False Creek South, and adopting policies by changing zoning policies to enable more housing, adopting city's financial plan through setting property tax rate to fund services and programs, and allocating resources to services competing capital projects and other priorities. Some examples of programs include allocating grants to nonprofit groups or business improvement areas such as Commercial Drive, Canby Village, Hastings North, and creating public plazas to allow liquor consumption. The role of the mayor has additional responsibilities. That includes chairing council meetings and public hearings, maintaining the order and facilitate debates in meetings, ensuring that the meeting rules are followed, and encourage expression of differing viewpoints. The mayor also chairs the police board and represents council when meeting with dignitaries, First Nations, provincial and federal governments. The mayor communicates with staff, primarily the city manager, also known as the chief administrative officer. We will now hear from the park board. Cheryl Chan, pronouns are she, her, has been at the park board since 2013. In her role, she is responsible for providing procedural, intergovernmental, protocol, and organizational support and guidance to 3 different board terms over that time. Her team coordinates and delivers all park board meetings, briefings, workshops, providing office and administrative support to commissioners. Her team also manages and responds to public inquiries, maintains and tracks official park board records and decisions, and assists commissioners with events, invitations, and special guests. Cheryl?
Thank you, Rosemary. I'm pleased to be joining you from the traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Coast Salish peoples, where I am honored to live, work, and play. I'm going to provide you a bit of an overview of the Park Board. It's responsible for over 240 public parks in the city of Vancouver, with exclusive jurisdiction and control over those designated as permanent or temporary parks. And the Park Board also manages all other parks that are under the care and custody of the Park Board as determined by Council. It's an extensive public recreation system of community centers, pools, rinks, fitness centers, beaches, golf courses, marinas, sport fields, and much more. And you may have seen our diverse horticultural displays, community gardens, destination attractions like Van Dusen Garden and Stanley Park, and Vancouver's lush urban forest, including the street trees, which our Park Board urban forestry staff maintain. Next slide, please. Protecting environmental biodiversity is one of the key responsibilities of the Park Board, along with promoting resilience and park stewardship. The Park Board also supports special events, fosters stakeholder and community partnerships. A lot of the Park Board services are provided through integral stakeholder and community relationships. The Park Board also provides, preserves, and advocates for parks and recreation services to benefit all people, communities, and the environment. Next slide, please. The Park Board itself is comprised of 7 Park Board commissioners, and those commissioners are responsible for enacting bylaws for the control, regulation, protection, and government of parks and the activities that occur in those parks. They approve strategic policy. They set the vision and service levels that guide parks and recreation services and programs. They represent the board on council and Park Board advisory bodies in liaison roles. They engage with the community, acting as their voice to ensure that Vancouver's parks and recreation services remain accessible and sustainable. Next slide, please. And that's my cue to hand it over to David to introduce the Vancouver School Board section.
Thank you, Cheryl. This is Rosemary. We will now hear from Vancouver School Board. David Green, pronouns are he, him, has been a secretary treasurer in the kindergarten to grade 12 provincial education program for almost 20 years and the secretary treasurer of the Vancouver School District since September 2017. He has been the chief election officer for 7 previous trustees elections and 1 trustee by-election. He is interested in emphasizing the governance role of the Board of Education for candidates seeking the office of trustee and the separation of that role from the operational role of district staff. Thank you for joining us today, David.
Thank you, Rosemary, and I'm pleased to be speaking with you tonight from the traditional unceded lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. I just want to give a little bit of background about the Vancouver School Board. Vancouver School Board is probably one of the most diverse public school systems in Canada. We have approximately 50,000 students from grades kindergarten to grade 12. And we are responsible for providing educational services to students in about 110 elementary, secondary schools. We also have an adult education program, and we also provide distance learning opportunities for students who wish to learn online. And of course, we also have international students from several different countries. Next slide, please. So the Board of Education is comprised of 9 trustees, 9 elected trustees. It's an independent body from City Council. It's incorporated under the School Act as a separate corporation. The board has some very important responsibilities. The primary one being the improvement of student achievement in the district. We are responsible for providing quality education services to schools in the city, but also in the university endowment lands. You'll find if you run for school board, you'll find that the city of Vancouver actually runs the election for the school district. But the people who live in the endowment lands and UBC lands are actually allowed to vote in the for trustees, but not for councillors. We're also trustees also will represent the school district at various provincial associations, the BC School Trustees Association, the BC Public School Employers Association, and most importantly, there's a governance role, as Rosemary mentioned. We set education policies that reflect what the community desires to see in the education plan that we have, and also consistent with provincial guidelines. The basic structure that we have is that there's only 1 employee of the school board, and that's the superintendent of schools. And all the other employees of the school district report to the superintendent. So as Rosemary mentioned about the governance and operational roles separation, the board is responsible for the governance function, and through the superintendent will provide direction to staff on the operational side. Next slide, please. Okay, next slide.
Thank you, David. That would be back to me now. We will turn back to the city, and I will speak briefly to the role of city in supporting elected officials and city departments. The city manager and the park board general manager are hired by the elected officials, and they work closely with the elected official to provide them with advice. They give direction to staff, and staff in turn are responsible for implementing the decisions of council or the board. This is another slide showing the reporting structure at the city. The city manager reporting to council, departments reporting to the city manager. A future session will cover a bit more detail on the city departments, particularly on their priorities and mandates. I just wanted to highlight that the Vancouver Library Board and Vancouver Police in the structure, as you can see, is highlighted in different color. Both funding to operate libraries in the police department are approved by council. The elections of the board members are independent of council and are governed under the Library Act and the Police Acts, respectively. As for the Board of Parks and Recreation, council also approves the budget, and the city runs the election of park board commissioners. So what happens after the election? Once elected, We will contact you to give an overview of what you can expect for the next few weeks after the election. After you're sworn in at the inauguration ceremony, you'll be expected to attend orientation sessions to review your role and authority as an elected official, review rules for council meetings and public hearings. You'll attend training sessions where mock council meetings will be set up. You'll attend information session on the priorities and mandates of each department over the next few months. Please know that you are not expected to be an expert in the areas of the city, but rather to represent the residents of the city. You will be provided with information at the orientation and information sessions so you can make the decisions at meetings. What support is available for you once you're settled into your new role? Well, the mayor will have their own team of political staff, typically around 3 to 6 staff, in addition to support staff provided by the city. Councilors will share one support staff for every 2 councilors to assist with administrative functions of the role. Now I'm going to invite Cheryl Chan back.
Hi there. Similar to at City Council, there is support available for Park Board Commissioners as well, and there is no expectation that commissioners are experts in the field of parks and recreation. There is the General Manager's office. The General Manager is hired by the Park Board Commissioners, and the General Manager's office provides strategic consultation, communications support, and any other advice as required. The Board Relations Office, which I manage, then also supports the GM's office. We're embedded in the GM's office and provide the procedures, the protocols, facilitate the liaison relationships, intergovernmental communications, and as well any other support that the commissioners may need. We also facilitate the orientation sessions and site visits that all new candidates will be asked to participate in to learn a little bit more about parks and recreation. And we will provide an information package of Park Board along with city departments and reference materials to help you with that orientation. And we do provide administrative support as needed, so assistance in scheduling meetings, coordinating events, invitations, managing inquiries, and there's lots of public inquiries. Park Board is very public facing, and assisting with meeting preparation and any motions and research that may go along with that. And on that, I believe I will hand that over to David on the next slide.
Thank you, Cheryl. I mentioned earlier that the superintendent is the only employee of the Board of Education. And the board chair and the superintendent will always have a close relationship. The connection between the board and the school district is through the superintendent. But the supports that are available for school board trustees come through my office with respect to certain procedures and protocols. We will also organize orientation sessions after the election in the fall. Throughout the term of the 4-year term of the board, there will be regular trustee workshops that we will provide information to the board members on, current developments and ongoing matters that impact the school district. We also provide information updates of all the district departments and school-based events. Media response is always through the board chair, and it's coordinated through our communications department. So we have a 4-member communications team. In my office, I have 3 assistants who help me organize the work of the trustees and arrange meetings and set up that sort of thing. So the administrative support is quite strong from my perspective, and I'm happy now to pass it over back to Rosemary, I believe.
Thank you, David. Now that you know a bit more about the functions of the city, the park board, and the school board, let's talk about why you should become a candidate. So why would you consider becoming a candidate in the upcoming election? Not only it is rewarding, you can make a difference in representing the residents of the city. You can be a voice at the table to help resolve the many issues that the city is facing. But despite the challenges of making tough decisions and managing work-life balance, it is really a rewarding role, and you will hear more from our guest speakers on this later. Considering this job, you'll need to be realistic about what is expected of you. For elected positions on council, you will spend a minimum of 4 to 6 hours in reviewing meeting agenda packages prior to attending meetings. Expect to attend many community events in addition to those council meetings. Because you represent the whole city, remember you're elected in a large electoral system, you are expected to be available to all residents. This is a full-time job, and it will be difficult to juggle another full-time job or part-time job. In smaller municipalities, it makes sense for this role to be a part-time job. But as you can see later on, not in Vancouver. I'm sure some of you have attended some of our council meetings, and they could be long. This is the reality of what you can expect in terms of time commitment. As you can see, you'll be spending many hours in meetings. For council and public commissioners, the number of hours exclude meetings as council appointed liaison to advisory committee meetings, external organizations such as Metro Vancouver, Union of BC Municipalities. There's also workshops and briefings you'll be attending during the week. And for school trustees, the numbers exclude committee meetings and workshops. These would be approximately an average of 55 meetings or 110 hours per year. As mentioned before, expect a high volume of reading and learning in preparation for meetings. You will attend council meetings and public hearings that occur every 2 weeks. Sometimes these meetings extend into the following week, which means the meetings are happening every week. The meetings are held in the mornings and very often until late at night. There'll be numerous community events that you'll be invited to, and you'll be obligated to attend them. I'm going to invite Cheryl back to speak.
Thanks, Rosemary. For Park Board Commissioners, there is also a pretty extensive time commitment. It's not as much as it is for Council. On average, most Park Board meetings are held in the evenings, on Monday evenings, but they can also, when necessary, be scheduled on other evenings. They are generally every 2 to 3 weeks. And so on average, over the course of a year, that can range anywhere from 10 to 30 hours per week as a commitment for just attending the board and committee meetings and preparing for those meetings. In addition to that, there are staff briefings, board workshops to ensure that commissioners are kept well informed of especially detailed projects. And then they also will be asked to attend advisory committee, community association, and park stakeholder meetings as the appointed park board liaison. And those hours can vary greatly depending on the number of meetings, the particular group, and the amount of time or the amount of time of each meeting that commissioners choose to attend. Participating in community engagement activities is one of the great parts of being a park board commissioner, but that also requires a time commitment. And then as well, there's responding to media and a high volume of public inquiries, but there is staff to assist with that. And so passing the next slide over to David.
Thank you, Cheryl. So school board trustees are expected or on average to work about 20 to 25 hours a week. And that's meant to prepare for and attend board and committee meetings, but we generally operate 10 months of the year. We don't generally have meetings in July and August. So we meet during the school year itself. We also, trustees are also responsible for attending community meetings, representing the board. And like I've said earlier, sometimes for provincial association meetings. We also have a very good connection with the city Trustees, individual trustees will sit on advisory committees with the city and report out at board meetings as to the activities that go on in those meetings. So we have a good connection with the city. And the meetings that take place throughout the year they're live broadcast and on YouTube channel. And now that we're getting back into in-person meetings again, I expect by the time the next board is in office, we will be doing all of our meetings in person, I suspect. Back to you, Rosemary.
Thank you, Cheryl and David. I would now like to introduce our guest speakers. From Women Transforming Cities, joining us today, we have Dr. Joy Masuhara and Trudy Goals, and from the Center of the Study for Democratic Institutions, School of Public Policy and Global Affairs, University of British Columbia, joining us Professor Gerald Beyer. Dr. Joy Masuhara, pronouns she, her, is the co-chair of Women Transforming Cities International Society, is a family physician and has been engaged in equity and inclusion work for many years. WTC, along with Canadian Research Institute for the Advancement of Women, completed a 3-year project, Action to Barriers to Women's Participation in Local Government in 2020. Trudy Goals, pronouns she, her, is the other co-chair of Women's Transforming Cities. A longtime fan of municipal politics, Trudy has worked on campaigns, been an advocate, and is one of the co-founders of the Feminist Campaign School. Currently, she is part of a coalition to bring in an ethics commissioner to create a path to safety for elected officials. Professor Gerald Beyer, pronouns he, him, is an associate professor of political science at UBC, where he teaches and conducts research in the field of Canadian federalism, parliamentary government, and the Constitution. Along with Professor Maxwell Cameron, he created the Institute for Future Legislators at UBC, which has trained over 500 aspiring politicians since 2013. I now invite Joy to present.
Thank you, Rosemary. I'm coming from the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And I'd just like to say hello to all of you and really thank you to the City of Vancouver for organizing this session and asking Trudy and I to speak tonight. And I just want to say that I applaud you all for just being here, for even considering running for public office. I wish you all well on this journey. There is so much to be done to help our city thrive and be a place of safety and well-being for everyone. So thank you for all your interest and efforts. So Women Transforming Cities is a charitable organization that was founded by former Vancouver City Councillor Ellen Woodsworth. And Women Transforming Cities works to dismantle intersecting systems of oppression with equity-seeking genders and movements to transform where we live into places where everyone can belong, participate, and have social, economic, and political equity. So we do this in many ways, and a few years ago, we collaborated with the Canadian Research Institute for the Advancement of Women on a 3-year project looking at barriers to women's participation in local government, with a focus on the cities of Surrey and Vancouver. In 2020, we did an informal look, basically just using publicly available information, so it wasn't a really scientific, rigorous examination. But we did this to determine the gender and other diversity amongst mayors and council members in Metro Vancouver. And of the 16 largest communities, 13 of the mayors are men, 3 are women, all are white. Of the 110 city councillors, 53 or 48% are women. So there seems to be gender parity, and I apologize for keeping this to a binary, but there were limitations on the information we could obtain publicly. 13 of those 110, so 12%, are non-white. Less than half of the non-white councillors are women. So we can see that the local governments do not fully reflect the population. We know that Metro Vancouver has one of the highest proportion of multicultural communities in the world living here, with racialized folk being about 50% of the community from census data. This is not reflected in our municipal governments. So in our project, we looked at what some of the barriers were for diverse women. We did a literature review and conducted interviews with many diverse women who had run for office, some successfully and some not. So these are some of the barriers, and I'll just go through them one by one. We know that they are not unique to women, but we do know that there's a disproportionate effect on women, and often more so for diverse women. So the first barrier, finances. Costs money to run a campaign. There's still a gender pay gap in Canada and the world, and the gap widens if you are racialized. Women and racialized women generally have fewer financial resources, so this becomes a barrier. Number 2, unpaid work. Despite some changes and progress, women still do more childcare, elder care, and household management than men. This adds more pressure in terms of time management and work-life balance. Number 3, societal expectations and stereotypes for women. Women are not expected to be leaders and face the no-win situation of if they are too bold, for example, they're taking on characteristics that when seen in men are positives, this is a negative. At the same time, if they are too timid or ladylike, they are seen as less capable. And this can often be worse for diverse women with additional stereotypes attached to race. So we heard stories of diverse women candidates not being supported by some of their own cultural communities, even though they may have been the first person from that community to ever get elected to office, because the expectation was for the woman to be working in the home. Number 4, racism, tokenism, and misogyny. So I won't comment too much on these, as they are all fairly self-evident. Women candidates are portrayed by the media. Often the portrayal is focused on what the candidate is wearing rather than what they are saying. Sexist and racist attacks in the political environment, and particularly now with social media, can undermine and deter women from entering or remaining in public office. And number 5, the electoral system itself. The electoral system of first past the post favors incumbents. So again, in particular, diverse women have a disadvantage. So ward systems and proportional representation are felt to improve this. But we're not going to have that for this upcoming election. So these are some of the findings from our project, and I hope I haven't been too discouraging. I know that, listen to Rosemary, she says it's very rewarding. All right, so luckily, I am able to pass over to Trudy, who will discuss things that can be done to reduce some of these barriers, as well as just some practical tips for all of you for your campaign. So thank you, I'll pass it over to Trudy.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Joy. Thank you for laying out all of those barriers, because that is a great place for us to start from. I want to echo what Joy said and say thank you for everyone who's here, who is thinking about running or has decided to run, or maybe you're here because you want to support a candidate. And all of those are really good reasons to get involved this year and be involved in this election. We really deserve to have elected officials who reflect our communities, and the more diversity we can bring to our elected table, the richer our communities are really going to be. So thinking about, Joy has given me the nicer job of talking about how to overcome some of these barriers or how to address some of them. And I'm going to start by naming a few of the ones that she just talked about and how we can actually challenge them. So we know that our electoral system and the way that we campaign is designed specifically for white men, and even more specifically for able-bodied white men. And this is actually a barrier for a lot of people to be able to participate. Campaigning itself is very ableist, It is very challenging to go out and door knock when you are not physically able to, or attend a town hall meeting if you are neurodivergent. So these are ways that you might find that you are challenged coming into this space. And we can talk about ways to campaign that work for you specifically. So there are some legal obligations to being a candidate, and they are laid out very clearly on the Elections BC website, which also has an email address and a 1-800 number on there. Those are the laws that you are required to follow around financial obligations, your obligations for filing, how you apply, who can make donations to your campaign and such. But outside of that, you have a lot of wiggle room as to how you're actually going to campaign. So one of the barriers that we found in this research that we did earlier was the amount of unpaid work that women especially, but I will just say folks who come from more marginalized homes often carry, whether it is the fact that you have to work 2 jobs in order to support your family, you do more caregiving duties in the home, you may work a job that isn't 9 to 5 Monday to Friday that wouldn't leave you with evenings and weekends to campaign in. So we need to think about other ways that folks can engage besides the traditional ways of actually getting out. And some of that, there's sort of an overarching thought that I would like you to consider around this, and it's how you create a campaign team. Being able to work with folks that you trust and who can come and support you in a myriad of ways to create a really viable campaign for you is really important. There are the same tools and the same basic strategies that work for everyone, which is identify who's going to vote for you and then get them out on election day to vote for you. But how you go about actually doing that doesn't need to be the way it's always been done. So rather than bringing only experts or people that you might consider an expert into your campaign, you might want to bring in 2 or 3 people who want to learn and can work together. You may want to consider having a group of people who support you at home. Maybe they come in and help with laundry and meals and childcare so that you can spend more time out talking to potential voters. You may also want to consider bringing in people who can address things like the financial barrier that women and other folks who are oppressed by gender often face in campaigns. Some of it's really cultural. It's not the same in every culture to go out and ask for donations. And we don't address this in our campaigns. So how do we address this so that you can go out and you can be successful in raising enough money in order to run a successful campaign? And that might be bringing in other folks who can do your fundraising for you. It might be looking at different strategies to go outside of your cultural community. It might be some education and some opportunity for your family or your community to support you in other ways, and you find that your financial contributions come from somewhere else. They're all barriers that we need to be really thoughtful about and the ways that we're going to address them. And there are strategies that we can address them together with. One of the other big pieces that I think that we don't talk enough about is that how we campaign is a lot about how we're going to lead once we're elected. So if you think about the kind of person you want to be when you're elected, that you want perhaps to be working with communities to create great solutions to the problems that our cities are facing, be that person in your campaign. Bring those communities together while you're campaigning. Bring them together before you start campaigning. Work in community with folks so that you are truly representing the folks that you are going to serve, as opposed to what we seem to perceive as an individual leadership style, where there's one person who stands away and picks up the phone and makes a phone call and consults occasionally, as opposed to is really in the community and working with people. We have this great opportunity to be able to shift that way of working. We've seen it successfully done in other communities. We've seen other folks who are not white, who are queer, who are disabled, who are of a variety of genders, who have been elected because they choose to do things differently, and they are bringing a real richness to our communities and solving problems in ways that really matter. One of the last things that I would like you to think about as you're going into this is that you get to make a lot of choices in your campaign, and we'd like you to make intentional choices. I say this because we have a tendency to default to what we've seen and think to be true. So one of the great examples that I'd like to talk about is the idea that we all need to be loud, bold speakers when we come out in public. Not everybody's like this. Some of people are really quite soft-spoken, for instance, And rather than having somebody practice and learn to be louder, maybe we learn to use technology better. So we bring microphones closer to our mouths so that we can speak in a way that's comfortable and genuine to us. So we don't need to show up like somebody else in our campaign, but we can truly be ourselves when we come out on the campaign trail. And the voters really get to know us and they elect the people they really want to elect. Thanks.
Thank you, Judy. I think now we are passing it over to Professor Byard.
That's okay with me, if that's okay with you, Rosemary. Thanks, everyone. I will also acknowledge where I am is on the unceded and traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. Very grateful for this opportunity to participate with you today. I will also echo what I heard from a couple of other presenters. Just super excited by the chance to engage with folks who are interested in running for office. When Max Cameron and the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions, when we put together the Institute for Future Legislators, it was for exactly that purpose, that there are barriers for a lot of people who want to try and run for office. One of them is an information barrier, and we thought our role could be to help overcome some of that. But what we've also learned is that when you give people that information, give them that opportunity to start to think about running for office, we can see real transformation in the way those institutions themselves work. They can work more collaboratively. They can work more deliberatively when people have a better idea of the opportunities there, and when there's a more diverse group of folks participating in those institutions. So, the people with a foot already in the door aren't attending candidate one-on-one sessions, and so I applaud those of you who are attending a candidate one-on-one session for trying to take that step just to find out more, to learn, and to try to get the opportunity to run for office. One of the things that I think is important to emphasize for a group like this, who are probably raised mostly on national and maybe provincial politics, if you pay active attention to what's going on in the world around you, is how differently municipal government works from the provincial or the federal government. You got a hint at that, of course, from the presentations from Rosemary and David and Cheryl. There are some division of functions, and so separate boards for school, for parks, and for the city as a whole. And obviously, subject matters that the city deals with kind of exclusively, and that other things are left to the provinces and to the federal government. But one of the sort of unique things is how, even though city councils make laws, we call them bylaws, but they're laws, and the fact that the city council governs, actively, executively runs a multi-billion-dollar, in the case of Vancouver, organization, we don't have the executive and the parliamentary systems that we would see at the provincial and the federal level. That means there isn't an equivalent of the prime minister or the premier at the municipal level. The mayor is very much a first among equals in the council, because the mayor only has one vote in council, just like every other councillor does. The mayor is not the chief executive of the city and is not the exclusive provider of advice to the city manager. And so those things are really important structural differences between municipal politics and provincial or federal politics, in addition to the kind of substance or subject matter differences that those municipalities have and that Vancouver works with. So there are, two separate functions really that you could think about if you're thinking about being a city councillor or a park board trustee or a school trustee, and that is the sort of lawmaking side of the job and the executive side of the job. that you're providing executive direction as a collective to the staff that run either the school and park boards or that run the city. And that is a collective function that has to be worked out between a group of people who don't always agree about everything, right? So Rosemary showed us the number of hours that councillors have been spending in meetings, both at all three these forums that we're talking about today, and they're relatively high. They're higher than they sometimes normally are right now because we don't have a city council in particular in Vancouver that is dominated by a single party. And so there's much more hesitation to approve the kinds of initiatives that one member or other of council might bring to that collective decision-making body. So that's a challenge. That means you have to learn to work together with fellow councillors, fellow trustees, to be able to do that. At the local level here in British Columbia, particularly here in Vancouver, parties do exist for that purpose, to try and make that coordination a little bit easier. But there's kind of a fractioning of that system right now too. So there isn't just two clear alternatives. There are multiple alternatives, and then they can all get elected, some even almost independently, and then have to work through that challenge of diverse opinions that come on a body like council. There was a great notice in one of the slides earlier that policy work takes time, and making big changes takes time. A lot of people run for office because they're motivated by great ideas about what should be done differently in the way the city or the province or the country works. They may have very specific ideas. They may be motivated by something very particular to their neighborhood, their community, their cultural community, or an interest based on schools or parks and so on. And making that kind of change requires, assembling allies, making sure that that's something the whole community wants, and then getting through some of the institutional constraints that collective decision-making bodies like a council have. So those institutions always come with constraints. They have formalized procedures for a reason. Democracy is messy and it takes time. There are public hearings to attend. There are public hearings to hear, to not just formally do, but to actually get the public input into those collective decisions. So that lawmaking function is a powerful one, but it is not a particularly efficient one, nor is it something that means people can get a lot done really quickly. Councils will have a lot of goals. They'll want to fix homelessness. They'll want to fix the overdose crisis, but it takes time to get agreement on the approach that they should take, and then to actually see that implemented, find the resources to do it, and to make it happen. On the executive function, I just reiterate that we don't have a strong mayor system in Canada, and certainly not in this province. Mayors are the figurehead of council. They are the people who talk to prime ministers and premiers and visiting dignitaries of all kinds. They are sort of the face of the city in a lot of ways, but they don't have command over council. If certainly they don't have a party that has a majority of votes on council, and so mayors have to work with the council that they get elected with to be able to give direction to the city staff. And again, that's true and imitated at the park level and at the school trustee level, where there are chairs for those bodies, but they chair the meetings and they don't instruct the staff directly the way a cabinet minister would in our provincial or federal systems. So, there's a handful of things that I think are really unique to Vancouver that I would want to highlight, just to make those things clear for folks. The challenges of governing in Vancouver, one is the at-large system that we have. So every councillor represents the whole city. They don't have wards, they don't have neighborhoods to cover. And that is sort of stops individual councillors from being advocates only of particular neighborhoods, but it's a challenge to get elected, and then a challenge to actually fully represent the whole city. It's a diverse and large city with lots of different pockets of interests and community, and it's hard for every councillor to be able to represent all of that. Not every councillor tries to represent all that, but the demands are very high as a result. Every community association, every organized interest, every commercial and corporate interest in the city knows that they need to be able to communicate with councillors. They need to try to get the support of councillors for the goals that they may have in their own activities. And so there's a lot of demands on individual councillors to be engaged with those communities. There's a lot of breakfasts, a lot of lunches, a lot of community events to attend, and high expectations from the city as a whole that councillors will be available for that. So, there's no limit on, and being that Vancouver, the city, is embedded within a larger Metro Vancouver that has adjacent cities that you don't really know the boundary to. That doesn't always mean that your car stays within the boundaries of Vancouver when you're engaging with that community. You might end up in a banquet hall in Richmond or a community hall in Burnaby to speak to Vancouver interests sometimes, because that's where those folks end up and want to be involved and engaged with you. Vancouver does have a party system that can make things a little bit more efficient within the way council works, but it also means that certainly at the present that it can be a much more divided council. When you have 3 or 4 parties instead of 1 or 2, that can make the whole efficiency that parties are supposed to represent in our political systems a little bit less efficient. And so there are multiple interests who have to align and realign with each other in order to get things done. And that is truly different than, again, our parliamentary system and that we see at the provincial or the federal level. The other thing, and we acknowledge this in our territorial acknowledgements, of course, are the Indigenous communities within the city of Vancouver. And so, like all communities within Canada, that is a unique thing that city councils have to try and engage with, try and push forward the project of reconciliation, to deal with the Indigenous communities that are on this land that is part of the city, but also with Indigenous policy issues that occur in bigger cities in Canada, right? With Indigenous populations, which may not always be, ancestral to the region. So all those things, I think, are another concern. The last thing, and this is what truly makes local government or local politics unique from provincial and federal, is the immediacy of access to the citizenry that people represent. So I've used the phrase high expectations a couple of times. If you become a city councillor or even a park board and school trustee, good luck buying a jug of milk without hearing from your constituents, right? You're immediately accessible to them anywhere you go within the city. And the higher the profile someone has, the more likely they're going to hear it everywhere they go. There'll be public events and others where you'll be clapped on and booed, but there'll also be those just one-on-one interactions that people would have normally. And again, federal and provincial politicians can sometimes escape those when they're farther away from their constituents in national and provincial capitals doing their job. So I think what it comes down to is you have to have 2 kinds of enthusiasms to be a good councillor. One is an enthusiasm for engagement with others. You can't do this job and be kind of bookworm exclusively, right? You have to be ready to get out there and engage with people. Trudy and Joy talked about campaigning, but even that the engagement doesn't stop when the office is won, right? That there's more and more demands for that kind of engagement. And then an enthusiasm for learning. A lot of the time that people will spend as trustees or as counselors is reading briefing books, getting up to speed on the issues that staff have identified for decisions, the things that, are multi-million-dollar choices in some cases, but that require some studying to get ready for. So a capacity to learn is much more important than any particular expertise, but a willingness to put in that time, right? To not just wait for a nod from somebody else in your party to say which way you should vote, but to have some sense, because there really is a true independence and opportunity for counselors and trustees to participate in those decisions. So I'll leave it at that. I think that's a bit of an overview of some of the things that we've seen for people who are contemplating office that they might not have thought of, but also how to be sort of better when you're there, to be ready and be prepared and be willing to kind of continue that enthusiasm for engagement and learning, I think, which are so critical to success in elected office.
Thank you so much to our guest speakers for your invaluable insights and advice. I'm sure we would love to have you speak a few more minutes, but we do have a lot of questions. We'll have time for a few questions now. I will read out the questions without identifying who asked the questions. If we don't get to your questions tonight, please email us at election@vancouver.ca and we'll provide you with whatever we can. If the questions are for our panelists, we can get the responses as well for you. Okay, so the first question, if I could ask our panelists join me on the WebEx so we can see each other, that would be great. The first question is regarding school trustee position. Is there a pattern to when these meetings happen? Mornings, spread throughout the days, or mainly in the evening? So that would be for David. David, are you able to answer this question?
Yes, most of the meetings that the trustees would have to attend are in the evenings. Board meetings are scheduled on Monday nights. It's the last Monday of every month throughout the 10 months of the school year. Committee meetings are on Wednesday nights, and depending on the number of meetings for each committee over the course of the year, they usually try to have about 5 or 6 meetings with each committee of the board. And they're held on Wednesday nights, and then trustee workshops can happen anytime, but most meetings and workshops with trustees are always in the evenings. I hope that answers the question.
Great, thank you, David. The next question would be for Cheryl. Can a park commissioner hold a full-time day job? Vancouver is an expensive city and a commissioner's pay isn't enough to live here.
That is very true. It is not enough. Yes, many of the commissioners do have full-time day jobs, and it is a big commitment for them. It does have a lot of impact on their lives, and so it is, I think, rewarding, but something to be mindful of.
Great, thank you, Cheryl. The next question, I think I'm going to ask Jerry to answer, maybe then pass it on to either Joy or Trudy. You've covered this in your presentation, but maybe you can provide a bit more context around that. What education or experience are needed?
Well, I mean, I think that's a really open qualification. There is certainly not, I mean, I started studying political science in the late 1980s, and I think every relative said, "Oh, you're going to be prime minister then, are you?" And I was always, "No, that's not my intention." And certainly, there's some value in understanding our political system for people who might want to run for office. But our expectation in our institute, for example, is we want nurses, and we want people who've worked in warehouses, and I mean these are people who inhabit the city and whose the choices of council affect their lives, right? We want people all across the spectrum. There's a lot of lawyers and a lot of other professional politicians, as they're sometimes called, and I don't think that that's wrong either, but we want to see a wide variety of people. And as Joy and Trudy pointed out, that some of the kinds of jobs that people have can be a barrier to their ability to do this kind of work. If you're working 12-hour shifts, it's hard to meet those Wednesday night meetings sometimes without a lot of juggling. And so I think we've seen a little bit of a shift in the way that institutions work, maybe more at the provincial and federal level, where parliament's still kind of are relatively 9 to 5, and so they can be a bit more accommodating about some things than the council model has always been sort of assumed to be part-time, so it's in evenings and all that sort of stuff, so that can make it challenging. But as far as credentials go, I mean, it should be something that's open to everyone. I think the challenge for every council and for people who get into it is if you're not coming into it with the idea that you're ready to learn some more, right? You have to have some enthusiasm for wanting to learn some more, either about the subjects themselves, so you're ready to take a deep dive into transit planning, or you're ready to learn about the community, as Trudy pointed out, to gather some of those people together before you get there, not just say you're going to, right, but to learn from those parts of the community, so that you can actually show that in the work that you end up doing. And again, that's my point about enthusiasm, both for engagement and for learning. To be able to do that is much more important, I think, than any specific training people might have. But I'd be happy to hear what Joy and Trudy think too.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. I'm happy to jump in here. So I once went to see some panelists who were elected to municipal council tables. There were 4 women and 1 man who sat there, and the 4 women talked extensively about experience at work and education that they had to come before they wanted to come into this role. And when they got to this gentleman and asked him, "What made you want to run?" he shrugged his shoulders and said, "I coached sports for 25 years and I got bored, so I thought I'd do this." So the point of my story is that I think we overthink the idea that we need qualifications to do this. I think we need a desire to want to do the work. The real only criteria is that you need to be 18 on voting day and a Canadian citizen and not be disqualified for a list of things like having a current criminal record, I think. Really, it is, no one needs to ask you. There's a ridiculous stat out there that women need to be asked multiple times to run. No one needs to ask you. You need to want to do this. You need to want to change something in your city, and you need to bring that enthusiasm for the work to the role.
I'll just, yeah, I agree with Trudy, and I think there is no sort of best credentials for this work. It really is about bringing in, the value of your lived experience, living in a city. And so having that, diversity on your council and school board and park board is really valuable. And also, I think being, having that capacity to continue to listen and continue to learn. Those are really the skills we need to bring into this work. And yes, maybe we talk about the people needing to be extroverted, etc. But there's lots of value to people that are more introverted as well. Give them the space and the chance to have their views known, and you can learn lots of really great things and be led in very, very good ways. So yeah, that's all I'll say about that.
And I'll just add,
Engaged, not extroverted. So you just have to be engaged. You can't hide. That's all that matters. That's right.
Thank you for that. I just wanted to add, as mentioned in my presentation, we don't expect elected officials to be experts in any areas of the city. We will provide information as you go along. We do try to space it out so you're not so overwhelmed with it on your first 2 months of your job. So we will provide the information before you make those decisions. So thank you. The next question, I think that will be for me. Do I have to join a party to register to become a candidate? No, you can be an independent, absolutely. You don't need to register at all until you submit your nomination with me. That a party, if you wanted to join a party, then there's a few more steps, and our future session will have a bit more on that as well. So hopefully that gives you enough information, that question. The next one, I think it would be for Joy and Trudy. Given the targeted attacks and violence on many BIPOC and LGBTQ plus and women face during elections, is there guidance or resources for how to navigate municipal elections from an intersectional lens to support racial and gender diversity, protection of candidates during campaign and election? And Jerry, feel free to jump in after as well.
Do you want to take this, Joy, or would you like me to?
You go ahead. You go ahead, Trudy.
Okay. Well, the short answer is no, there aren't really any safety protocols in place or any resources for folks, which is terrible. And it is because this is not something that men generally experience when they're running for elections, not in the same way that folks who experience oppression because of their gender or their race or other identities. And it is real. It does exist. Like, I don't want to minimize that it doesn't exist. In Feminist Campaign School, we do talk about some strategies around this, which include bringing in people who can help you deflect those pieces, who can help you debrief it at the end of the day, to help identify and validate when it is like really harmful versus maybe annoying pieces. I know it often comes up that we discuss it about being targeted on social media, which can be like really devastating, and it can lead to more in-person harmful experiences as well. So yeah, the short answer is no, there is nothing particularly set up to protect folks. I don't know if the city of Vancouver is exploring some way of people to report harassment or not, or what. I'm not even sure what jurisdiction they would have to take any action on it, unfortunately, which is one of the bigger challenges. Not to deflate people's desire to do this, but yeah, I just want to validate for people, it is real, you do experience it. And there is some support out there, I would say, is probably a better way to address it.
I just add, I mean, we used to say that people who want to run for office, you just got to have a thick skin. I don't think that's enough anymore to say, right? That I don't think there's anything really acceptable about the kind of stuff that you're talking about, right, Trudy? That people are experiencing. We've seen it at the provincial and federal level as well. A graffiti on campaign offices, and in addition, a very physical manifestation of it, as opposed to the sort of more social media side of it. And it really, it's a policy challenge too. I mean, what is the best tool to try to stop this? We have at the center actually have done some work on trolling on the campaign trail. We have a report there that is showing it is, of course, just as you would expect, that it's largely targeting the kinds of groups that the questioner was asking about, right? It's not white men who are being bothered on social media so much as others, and so it's a really unfortunate element, because we're here trying to encourage lots of different people of lots of different backgrounds to run, with the possibility that some of them are going to be much more harmed in the process than others, and so we have to find a policy solution to this, I think, to be able to honestly encourage people and say it's going to be okay. And I think some of the solutions you suggested as well, just around that campaign team, and that those kind of tips from campaign schools, are also very helpful.
Yeah, it is a collective effort. I think all of us need to speak out against that, and having, the media supporting us, the voters, other candidates. It's a collective effort, and it won't go away overnight. It's going to take time to change that mentality. So we're well aware of the issue. So hopefully we'll find some solution for that. Thank you. The next question is, I think this is for Jerry. Independent candidates are becoming more common. Traditionally, they have not often been successful. How can an independent get his or her message better known?
Rosemary, you can help me with this. How many people ran for council last time?
158.
Yeah, for
The
the
total, yeah, I think it was about 76, I want to say, for counselors, just the
council.
council
Okay.
race,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so that's one of these consequences of an at-large system, right? Is that that it's easy to get lost in that 76, and so I think the likelihood of Vancouver's system, well, as long as we have at large, not being a party system is really low. Independents are going to have a much harder time to get that name recognition or to be seen at the top of the ballot. And in addition, you can't change your name to A. Aardvark Anderson because Rosemary at some point will pick your name out of a hat to decide where your name is randomized onto the ballot, right? So getting at the top of the ballot does help, but it's randomized, so it's not going to be able to work that way. So I think I mean, it's an unfortunate truth that independents are going to have a really hard time in the Vancouver system because of that at-large nature of it. Even people with the party label will have a hard time if they're newer to the party. And so we do see, and it's interesting, we're talking about all three kind of opportunities here between park, school, and council in general. But we know a lot of people start on park board or start on school as a school trustee, where there's probably a smaller pool of candidates, get elected, make a name for themselves, work hard, and then demonstrate and maybe get some of that recognition that helps them get elected citywide as well. And again, often that's through the parties themselves. So I think Councillor DeGenova was a Parks Board commissioner right before she was on the Parks Board before she ran for council. I know Andrea Reimer was a school trustee before she ran for council with Vision. So that's quite common, path for folks as well if they want to try it out. Even not that any one is any less than the others. I know there is staff from all three, so we're not going to make that distinction.
Yeah, for sure. I just want also to add, you get your have your network advocate for you. Get out there in the community, attend all candidates meeting. Be part of the group, right? Get your name out there. During nomination period, we would be asking candidates to submit their biography. So it's really, really important you have that for us, and that will be included in the voters guide. So that's another way that we can help facilitate, your name out there for the election. Yeah, thank you for that. The next question deals with dates with registration. So I'm just going to comment that that information is going to be made available on our website. And actually, the next session that we're hosting, I think at the end of the month, will have a lot of that information. I just want to have some time for the other questions that we have. The next one is, I like to run for city council, but I'm a person with disability receiving social assistance, and I don't know a lot of people with lots of money. So how much do I need to raise, and what are the main reasons for raising money other than campaign costs? So I'm going to open that up to maybe Jerry, you want to start with that, and then join Trudy?
I'd rather Trudy or Joy start. I mean, Trudy's a campaign expert, so.
Well, how's this? You don't have to raise any particular amount of money. There's a maximum that you can raise. There is no minimum that you have to raise. Really depends on how much money you want to spend. So candidates will often buy lawn signs, do a mail out. The mail outs are very expensive. Getting your stuff printed for your mail out. I mean, one of the strategies to get people to remember your name at the ballot is to make sure that they have a card with your name on it they can take with them on election day. There are all sorts of places you could spend your money and you don't have to. So if you were looking to run a more budget-friendly campaign, you might only want to register a website so that you have a digital presence, and maybe get buttons made for all of your supporters to wear, or something that's a little more cost-effective, but it doesn't have to be an expensive campaign.
I mean, I think that marketing and getting that name recognition is the challenge, and there's lots of different tactics to make sure. I think it's also mailing lists and getting able to be able to get people to sign up, so that you can get in touch with them. If you if you have a bank of volunteers, I think that could be as much as important as anything. That there really are different kinds of power in this world, and one of them is a kind of the network power of being able to communicate and connect with a lot of people. Money can help ease grease that a little bit, and certainly lots of road signs and the like. But we don't have an open-ended system, as Trudy points out, so it's not like you can buy everything with millions of dollars. But money does kind of make the wheels move a little bit smoother as well. But it's not the only thing that will help people get elected, for sure.
Great, thank you for that. The next question is, what is the ratio of success between independent candidates and party-supported candidates? Is there any historical data available?
No, signing up for a PhD defense. I don't have that. And I mean, Rosemary, again, you would have some idea that I mean, anecdotally, I would say that it's a much lower success rate for
Yes.
independents, right? And the independents that do succeed are more likely to have been a party member and are an incumbent or something like that, right? That would be the independents. And again, that'd be true in provincial and federal politics as well. That that we kind of have these expectations about parties. We're talking outside of the city of Vancouver, that's a different game. If we're talking about Cranbrook or someplace like that, but our audience is for Vancouver, and I think even in surrounding municipalities, it tends to work in that way.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah. The other question we touched a little bit on this is an important question. I think if we have time, maybe we can talk about it again. Unfortunately, in the current world we live in, some politicians can face personal attacks both online and sometimes in public. What would you say to someone considering running for public office in regards to the risks and how one should prepare to handle themselves online in public should they end up being elected? What is the best way for someone who does want to make a difference in the community to not be discouraged by these challenges? Trudy, I think I'm gonna ask you maybe for some advice again on this.
Yeah, I know it is such a real issue and is such a big issue for people, and I don't want it to be the thing that discourages you. So I think the best advice that I have around that, or the best thing for you to consider, is to go in with a plan. Have a plan for when this happens so that you know what you want to do. Are you going to respond on Twitter when somebody is difficult, critical, rude, harassing? Or are you going to call 10 people who can all go on and bury that comment for you so that no one else has to see it? Like, there's strategies that you can use to deal with it so that you don't have to. Do you want to be the candidate who addresses these things publicly? Some people can do it and it really works for them. Others can't, and it deflects from the real work. And that really is the role of that kind of harassment, is to deflect you from getting the work done. So if you're committed to getting the work done, find some strategies that work for you. I'm happy to talk with you after this about what more like deeper strategies can be if folks have, really specific concerns. But yeah, I think it is just going in with a really clear plan for how you want to deal with things.
Great, thank you. Before I ask Jerry or Joy if they have further to add, is there any more questions? If you do, please set it in. We will be ending the session shortly after the last question. Thank you. Jerry or Joy?
I would just add, as well as having specific plans, that people pay attention to self-care. It's really important, particularly while campaigning, which can be, well, the whole job actually, but campaigning can be quite brutal. So self-care is really important, and if you can get it, into your sort of daily plan ahead of time, so it's there, and it's working and it's effective. You know which strategies are the most effective for you, to keep yourself physically, emotionally, psychologically well. Then you'll perform the best and you'll have the most impact when you're elected.
I mean, I think I almost tie those things together. One of the things that we've listened to presentations from former politicians in our institute for the last 7 or 8 years, and one of the differences, I guess, between federal, provincial, and municipal politics is, of course, with that immediacy I was talking about, running into your constituents all the time in the grocery store and elsewhere. But it also means that you are closer to family and you're closer to friends on a regular basis, right? So there is that advantage, I guess, of local politics or municipal politics, is that you're not in some far off town trying to do the job and keep the family together and respond to those pressures. There are a lot of time demands, of course, and that's where self-care and the rest comes in. But hopefully you can rely on some others as well to be able to deal with that, either in terms of the kind of mass of incoming that is social media and the rest, or just to deal with the logistical challenges of the day, getting from A to B and making sure you're fed and your clothes are clean when you're there, because those are all they're really mundane things, but a campaign demonstrates who can get a hold of those things and who can't, because I think they're a real test. They're marathons at a sprint pace for the most part, I think, when the campaign window opens.
Great, thank you very much. I think we are at our time. Any questions related to campaigning? The best thing to do is go on the Elections BC website, and we have that link on the City of Vancouver website. If you can't find it, if you have any other questions, please do email us. Our email address is elections@vancouver.ca. Maybe what I'm going to do now is ask our panelists last piece of advice for our future candidates. Maybe we'll start with Trudy.
Yeah, make good decisions. This is your time to plan. So plan everything. So all you have to do is deliver it during your campaigning time. You don't have to be planning and campaigning at the same time. So you have lots of choices. Make the choices that you want. Be the candidate that you really want to be.
Joy?
I hadn't really thought about this, but I would just say, remember to have some fun as well, because it is a tough job, and I really do applaud people for stepping up for public office. But remember to have fun.
We kicked off the whole project of our institute with a conference on why don't more good people go into politics. It dealt with many of the kinds of things we've heard in these questions, bad reputations or online abuse for people who step up and run for office. And one of the things we try to do we've been trying to do is to get rid of some of those barriers for people's thinking about running. And so my advice is to encourage people to think they can do it, because I think everyone can, and we need everyone to step up. We need people who are willing to engage and to learn for their communities. It can't just be the folks who have always done it for years, or the folks whose foot is already in the door, right? So it really is, I think, very encouraging to see lots of interest. And to see people really, take that chance, even if they might not win the first time. Try and try hard and give it your all. So a lot of encouragement to folks who want to do this. I really appreciate it because you make the system work. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much to those involved, including Cheryl, David, Joy, Trudy, Jerry, all closed captioner, registered ELS interpreters, and my City of Vancouver colleagues who helped put this session together tonight. Thank you for attending, whether it's in person or online. We hope this session was helpful. The recording of the session will be made available on our website with the transcript soon. When you exit the platform, you'll be directed to our feedback form, or you can click on the feedback form in the chat, which is now there. We will also email it to you. Please consider registering for our next candidate session module 2 on April 20th. where we will discuss deadlines, finances, and key dates. We have included that also in the chat. Thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.